let's make a start. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to September's Planning Committee meeting. Can we start with probably the longest item on the agenda, apologies, please?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies received from Councillor Allen. Councillor Loveridge and Councillor Sally Nicholson is substituting. Councillor McCarthy, Councillor Freeman, Councillor Simpson is substituting, and Councillor Matt Smith.
Alison and Sally, welcome. Welcome back to both of you. Good to see you both. Any declarations of interest at this stage from anybody? No. Okay. Normal rules apply, which I don't think we need to go through in detail with everybody. Anything on the minutes of the last meeting is sent out from August 21st. If not, we'll take those as read, and I will sign those there. Angela, if you could pass those over, I'd be grateful. I've got no urgent business at item 4. Item 5, I don't think we've got any questions from the public. Okay. Takes us on to item 6, the planning applications. And 6.1 is first, and we're at 38 North Hill. And Abby, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So this application relates to number 38 North Hill and is for an extension to a purpose-built student accommodation development. The application seeks to provide 6 additional studio bedrooms, and the office's recommendation is to approve the application subject to conditions. So I just thought this might be helpful. So the application site is located on North Hill. Mutley District Centre is located to the north and the city centre to the south. The University of Plymouth is to the southwest on the image, and the Arts University is to the southeast. So as we go on to Street View, looking up North Hill towards Mutley Plain, on the right is the applicant's student accommodation development that is currently under construction at number 40 to 42 North Hill. So this was conditionally approved by members at Planning Committee in September last year. Adjacent to this, where the red arrow is pointing, is number 38 North Hill, to which this current planning application relates. Also within this terrace is Doorsteps Cafe, which is the double-fronted unit on the right. On the left of the image, we can see the student accommodation scheme known as the Reservoir. And along this stretch of North Hill, there are a mix of commercial uses, and the wider area is predominantly residential in character. So the consented scheme on the left comprises of studio flats for 16 students and includes communal living areas. This planning application seeks to provide 2 additional floors above Class Barber to provide 6 additional studio units. Just to highlight that this application does not propose any changes to the Barbers. We have received 1 letter of representation from the public raising concerns in regard to building student flats and their impact on North Hill. So here is the approved North Hill elevation plan for the scheme that's currently under construction at number 40 to 42. And here is the proposed North Hill elevation showing the proposed two-storey extension above number 38 outlined in the dotted red line. And in the top right-hand corner there is a 3D visual. So here's another visual looking southeast with the red arrow pointing to the proposed extension. The intention is to create a seamless continuation of the consented scheme through the use of matching materials, window proportions, and overall symmetry. The extension includes a slight projection forward of the building line and different coloured cladding to create modelling and interest. This is the proposed southern elevation plan. So a key urban design consideration here is ensuring that this elevation provides modelling and interest without prejudicing the potential future development of the remainder of the terrace. So that's the area above Doorsteps Cafe. Similar to the consented scheme, this proposed elevation looks to use a mix of render and rock panel cladding in varying colours, and urban design raised no objection to this approach. It is recommended that full details of external materials are dealt with through a condition. So moving on to the floor plans, as previously mentioned, this application does not seek any alterations to the commercial unit that is Class Barber. Students would access the accommodation via the North Hill ground floor entrance within the consented scheme. The proposed first and second floors would have an identical layout with 3 studio units on each floor. These range from 21 to 25 square metres in size, which is comparable to both the consented scheme and other PBSA developments within the city. At roof level, the applicant intends to provide additional solar PV panels within the newly created roof space, and a condition is recommended for the submission of further details of these. So as this proposal is for an extension to number 40 to 42, students would have access to the basement level of that building, which provides communal student areas, including a games room, cinema room, seating areas, and laundry facilities. It's proposed that the additional six students would be able to book use of 2 existing drop-off spaces within Bedford Terrace for arrivals and departures, and this would be organised through the management team. So the application site is not allocated for PBSA within the Joint Local Plan, and officers have therefore assessed the proposal against the criteria of Policy Dev 12, which is on the screen. Just for context, Policy Dev 12 recognises that there is a need for PBSA and states that it is preferable that student needs are met as far as possible in PBSA, as this can reduce the need to convert general family housing into student flats and HMOs. Officers have also given significant weight to the fact that the city currently cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, and a student accommodation such as this would contribute towards the city's housing figures. So, looking at the criteria of Dev 12, an identified need for this type of student accommodation was established as part of the approved application at number 40 to 42 North Hill. Policy Dev 12 seeks to prevent an excessive concentration of student accommodation in one locality. Officers acknowledge that there is a high concentration of student accommodation in this area. This is not uncommon for areas close to universities, and noting the building's location on the busy North Hill Road, officers do not consider that an additional 6 students in this location would result in an excessive concentration. Dev 12 refers to the need for high quality development. The proposed studios, as mentioned earlier, are comparable in size to those found elsewhere in the city. The wider building contains communal living areas of which students would have full access. Similar to the consented scheme, no external amenity space is proposed due to the constrained built-up nature of the site, but the building is opposite Drake's Reservoir and is within walking distance to Beaumont Park, which officers consider to be acceptable. Dev 12 requires management plans to ensure positive and safe living environments are created and potential negative impacts on the local community are minimised. A detailed management plan was submitted as part of the consented scheme, and this included security arrangements, monitoring, the complaints procedure, and building maintenance. An updated management plan would be required to account for the additional bedrooms proposed through this application, and this is recommended to be secured via condition. In terms of parking provision, the site is considered suitable as car-free development, similar to the consented scheme. This is by the Highway Authority due to its sustainable location. The presence of parking zones in the area means there would be limited opportunity for overspill parking, as students would not be eligible for residence or visitor permits within these zones. As required by Policy Dev 12 and the SPD, the use of 2 existing parking spaces within Bedford Terrace for the purposes of student arrivals was secured as part of the consented scheme, and it is proposed that these spaces would serve the additional bed spaces under this application. To manage the use of these spaces, the applicant would implement a booking system with a staggered approach at the start and end of term times, and this should be set out in an updated travel plan, which is recommended to be conditioned. As required by Dev 12, a layout has been provided that demonstrates the 6 studios could be converted to standard residential flats without significant intervention, and this future-proofs the development in terms of design to support potential alternative uses. The additional studios would utilise the bin stores and the cycle stores approved as part of the consented scheme, and overall officers consider the proposal complies with policy Dev 12. So just in terms of other planning considerations, the development is exempt from the mandatory biodiversity net gain requirement, and it is noted that the consented scheme shall provide bird and bat boxes, landscaping and a green sedum roof. As I mentioned earlier, the proposal would accommodate additional solar PV panels within the roof space, and officers consider this to be acceptable. With regards to drainage, the applicant intends to connect to the existing combined sewer as per the consented scheme. There would be no increase in impermeable area as a result of this application, and the lead local flood authority raised no objection on that basis. And that concludes the end of my presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Abby, thank you very much indeed. We have two speakers on this item. The first is Councillor Steve Ricketts. If you'd like to make your way down. If you don't remember, you've got 5 minutes, and I'd be extremely worried. Would you like to be told when 4 have gone?
Yes, please, Chair. Really appreciate that. Thank you.
Whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, committee. So, 38 North Hill. As the officer spoke about, there is a relationship between 40 and 42, which I opposed here vigorously. Because I believe North Hill should be a mixed-use situation, and it was a shame to see that nightclub bar offer turned into student accommodation for 16 students. That's part of the relevant planning history, and again, it's joining together the two blocks. Every time I walk up and down North Hill, I'm more convinced that I was right on the first application, because for me, the urban design is completely wrong. It doesn't fit the area, and I stand by it. And this is an extension of that. When I look at it, it isn't right. It doesn't fit the roof lines, it doesn't fit North Hill, and I don't want any more of it. And hopefully you'll support me on this application to oppose. The officer says it's only 6 students. Well, initially it was only 16, now it's only 6. And then you can see there's some more space for further development, and then it'll be only whatever. That's what happens in Drake Ward. It's the drip. It's only just one application here, one application there. Over a 20-year, 30-year period, it becomes serious, okay? And that's why we've got sustainability issues in the community. So I do believe it's unsightly, and I believe that you should refuse it on Dev 20, which is the urban design. You've seen the photos, you can flick back through. Surely you agree with me that it doesn't fit North Hill, and that's what local people are telling me. The other area which I really hope we can use, and I really hope this council can use the powers it's got, is there was a compelling argument that this fitted Dev 12. There's also an extremely compelling argument that it doesn't fit Dev 12. At the end of the day, this is not an allocated site for purpose-built student accommodation. I repeat, this is not a site in the joint local plan for purpose-built student accommodation. That's the headline. So, on that basis, you should refuse it on Dev 12. Now, the argument is, if it doesn't fit, there's some other points that were laid out on the slide. There's 11 points. And one of them says it's okay, if it's not an allocated site, it's okay because on point 3 it says if it's not excessive concentration of student accommodation in the vicinity. Well, come on. Let's be real. This is an excessive concentration of student accommodation in one locality. We've all got eyes. Look left, look right, look behind. It's everywhere you look. So it's completely at odds. And this isn't sustainable for the community in North Hill. So I could go on, as you know. I want North Hill to be a mixed-use area, and this is another application breaking the cycle. I want commercial premises, shops, clubs, nightclubs, plenty of uses for North Hill. I don't want to be walking up North Hill in 10 years' time and there's nothing left but student flats. This isn't helping the housing crisis in the country. This is student accommodation, and it's completely at odds to what we want North Hill to be. So I urge you to oppose this application with all the policies we have at hand. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks very much indeed, Councillor Ricketts. Our second speaker on this is Mr. Robert Hurd. If you'd like to make your way down. 5 minutes will be allocated to you too. Would you like to be told when 4 have gone? Okay, whenever you're ready.
Chair, members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to speak in support of this planning application. Members will recall the original application for the consented purpose-built student accommodation at the site, which was granted by the committee in September last year. Comments by members at that committee confirmed strong support for the scheme and the provision of additional PBSA more generally. That development is now currently under construction, and this proposal is for extension of that scheme to provide further purpose-built student accommodation as an integrated continuation of the soon-to-be completed development. The commercial ground floor uses are unaffected and will be retained. As confirmed by the officer and explained clearly in the report, there is significant demand for all types of housing in Plymouth. The city can no longer demonstrate a 5-year land supply, and this application will contribute to the city's housing figures. Further, student numbers are increasing on a year-by-year basis, and despite the large numbers of students, there is a relatively small amount of purpose-built student accommodation available. Nearly 70% of all students do not have access to PBSA, and there are still thousands of students living in converted HMO-style properties. Despite this, given the choice, many students are choosing PBSA over HMO dwellings due to the better standard of the accommodation, additional security, on-site management and close proximity to the university and the town centre. Unlike some of the existing PBSA in the city, the proposals will be available to all students and occupation will not be restricted to first-year or international students. The yearly increase in student numbers is putting pressure on the city's housing stock, and the provision of new PBSA will provide much-needed dedicated student housing in accordance with the council's objective to house the majority of students in PBSA. The proposals therefore support the wider aims of the council to free up homes that were previously occupied by students, so that more dwellings will be available for young people and families. The officer report contains a detailed analysis of the main issues associated with the principle of development and concludes that the proposals accord with policies SPT2 and DEV12 of the Joint Local Plan. Further, the university have confirmed its support for the application. The applicant, Bryce Properties, is a locally established property business that provides high-quality accommodation to students in Plymouth. The business has been operating for over 27 years, and its property stock has been fully let throughout this time. They own and manage over 100 properties containing over 320 bed spaces. The friendly and well-established office is in a perfect location on North Hill, opposite the University of Plymouth and adjacent to the site. There are 5 full-time members of staff in the office managing the Bryce Properties portfolio, and it is open to the public during normal business hours. There are also 2 full-time maintenance personnel looking after the day-to-day running of the property portfolio from a maintenance and inspection point of view. Alongside this, Bryce Properties employs local specialist contractors to cover all other aspects of managing their property portfolio. It has an open door policy should members of the community need to engage with the company. The company is extremely well known for providing some of the highest quality properties in Plymouth and is a major sponsor of the Student Union. It is also the main sponsor of the Plymouth Marjon University Student Union and is committed to investing in the city. We ask that you support the officer's recommendation and approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Hurd, if you'd like to make your way back. It's now open to the committee, and Josh was first.
Apologies. It's been
You've been around long enough by now to know that.
Chair. Crikey. Yeah, just wanted to clarify, and I'm sure I know the answer to this, but the commercial space is being retained. Is that not right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So we've heard about the previous application I've spoken in support of that. I think, for students in our city to have PBSA is important. We know that's the gold standard, accommodation solution for students. So I think, to colleagues, that to me is a really important piece. I'm slightly confused against the opposition to this one because we're talking about building up vertically to provide additional PBSA, yet the same councillor is putting in objections to mixed-use accommodation within the same ward. So I'm just really confused because we need the accommodation, and surely this frees up more accommodation within the ward for families, much needed accommodation for families. So I'm just really perplexed why we're even here on this one. Thanks, Joe.
Maddie.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a question. Now, obviously, I drive past this. I've just driven past it literally 20 minutes ago, obviously, to get here today. So the original building isn't complete. On the photographs, I think on that photograph there, for example, you've got windows all along the left-hand side. So where the proposed new development, has the original application had to come back to you to remove windows on the right-hand side of the elevation, please?
Sorry, so the right-hand side of the elevation of the consented scheme.
Yeah, so on the existing consented one, go back one, yeah. So on the blue, which represents the previously discussed and agreed one, the edge that abuts the red, when we agreed the blue one, were there windows as part of the wall that now abuts the red?
No.
If that's your question, Maddie. Thanks.
No, so that elevation is actually kind of similar to the elevation that's now been proposed. There was no habitable windows there. There was just panelling and render and rock panel cladding to create some interest, but no, there was never any habitable room windows there. Or windows in general, sorry.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. It's just, I find it odd that perhaps the developer actually had already planned this in their heads to do the extension. So what Councillor Ricketts has actually said is, obviously when you showed the photographs just now, or the artistic impression, there were windows along the side, so on the bottom side of the red on the picture there. So if, as Councillor Ricketts stated, they decided they do want to buy the fresh air on top of the other buildings going along, when are they going to put that application in? Because does that mean those rooms will lose their right to daylight? It's just something I feel a little bit uncomfortable about.
I thought we'd established with the previous answer that on the southwest edge of the go back to the one with the red and blue. And unless I've misunderstood Abby, the southwest of the blue, which is now in red, didn't have windows. And part of what's being built currently that you saw from your car, there are no windows being built along that elevation.
Just to correct, actually, there is a window just where it's inset on that small area there. Oh, you can't see it with my mouse.
Can you use your cursor, maybe?
Oh, you can't see my cursor maybe.
Oh, no.
Let me just get an image. I should have an image. In fact, the floor plan should show here. So let's go. So this is first and second floor. So you do have a window where it's set in. Is an L shape.
Could you try your cursor with the? Because it is a bit tricky to.
It's not, no.
Who's got one of those laser things? Right. Is that the? Go back one. Is that the current application you're looking at? Okay.
That's the current. Can I? Should I stand up? I'm tall enough.
Let's be daring. First time ever.
So in terms of the consented scheme, you don't have any windows in this elevation, but see where you've got labelled as a courtyard.
So no, wait if you get back to your microphone. So no windows that have been allowed or given consent previously would disappear if we approve this?
No.
Okay. Carry on, yeah.
So my question then, considering the position of this, the views would be fantastic of the Hoe and Cornwall. So why are there no windows on the right-hand side of that picture? It just rings, it's just because Councillor Mick Ricketts made the point of saying the street scene, it doesn't fit in with North Hill. So being in such a prime location up on the hill and seeing the views across, it's almost as though this application has been put in with the prospect of potentially going right the way across to the end. So I know it's not really planning consideration, but it's just got alarm bells ringing, and you probably can't even answer that question, but I just agree with Councillor Ricketts on what he said.
So I think it's worth mentioning that in terms of urban design, when I've discussed it with urban design officers, they're really keen to see what they call an interim modelling and interest on that elevation, because we don't want to prejudice future development above doorsteps from coming forward. So if you look at, I think it's Wanamada Street, which is the building behind, it's a large expanse of plain, sort of just a blank facade, because we didn't, you wouldn't necessarily want windows there because it could prevent development coming forward on this site. So a consistent sort of urban design consideration is how do you create an interesting building that doesn't prevent future development across the rest of the terrace.
So is it interim modelling? What?
It referred to as interim modelling and interest. So there's modelling and interest in the design.
We'll be asking questions at the end, by the way.
But it doesn't prejudice future development of the remainder.
Okay, Josh again.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I actually heard you describe the interim modelling during the presentation, so I just wanted to say that and note that you had described that, and I actually thought that was a strong point because it does leave the opportunity to further develop that space above the other units should people wish to in the future, and given the proximity to the campus of the site, although it's not necessarily described as PBSA at the moment, a prime site for that, it's very logical. So to me, the fact that you described that and the fact that that's in there seems like a real positive.
Thanks. Patrick.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. If I could just come back to the policy, Dev 12, and obviously the general change in the amount of housing, the amount of accommodation we need to provide since the government late last year changed the numbers. When you break that down, we say we don't have a 5-year housing land supply, but of the housing land supply, how much do we need in terms of additional student accommodation? Because generally the housing need is on a needs assessment. So when these policies were put together in the joint local plan, we generally knew what type of need was required for the different groups of requirements. So, family housing, starter housing, specialist housing for disabled people, student accommodation. So when we talk about the growth of numbers for students, what's the delta between what would have been on our joint local plan and the requirement of the government now to deliver the new housing land supply?
I don't have that information, so
I could maybe help with that one. So there is a standard conversion rate for the provision of sort of student accommodation, and that then gets converted into sort of normal housing delivery. So I don't know what that is offhand, but say 6 bedrooms of purpose-built student accommodation equates to the provision of 1 house towards our housing supply. So I don't think we have any identified need of a level of purpose-built student accommodation, but the provision of that is taken into account in the overall housing supply.
Thanks. That's very useful, and I think it would be probably worth us having a training session at some stage, Chair, on the detail of the policy, because I'm still not satisfied, and I know you've given a very good answer, Katie, but I'm still not satisfied that I know in terms of the government's aspiration for housing growth, that in this particular sector where we've had declining student numbers, and the likelihood is of continuing declining student numbers, that there is actually an unmet unmet need for purpose-built or any student accommodation. And that was principally the reason why the Joint Local Plan came up with this policy. And as Councillor Ricketts has said in his contribution to the committee, you can take some of these points in the policy, Dev 12, and actually turn them on their head and say it's justification not to support this application. So I think it would be useful to have, as we have had, and I wasn't part of the training session, but I know obviously members of the committee that were full members last year have had it, in terms of the change in the requirement for meeting a 5-year housing land supply or not meeting it, as the case is at the moment.
We can certainly look at I don't want us to get bogged down here, but you have my assurance that we will go away and do just what you're suggesting in the spirit you're suggesting.
Because I think in the context of this sort of application, we're generalising on it. Now, in terms of the points that have been raised, and Councillor Mrs Bridger makes a very fair point, in terms of the incremental development, so we've had no pre-application discussion on this specific application. Clearly, I don't know if there was one when the committee considered it last year in relation to the property next door. But what we're having is an incremental growth, and the impact, therefore, of these sort of growth has an impact on the diverse nature of the community in North Hill. And that's my concern. That was always the concern of the Joint Local Plan, that you continue to try wherever possible to have a mixed type of community, and not just basically, as we see in rural areas and holiday, basically second home owners. You could have a situation where an area of Plymouth is wholly students with very little in terms of other tenure, and becomes a ghost town in the holiday period. So I do have concerns, and I certainly welcome your assurance, Chair, that you'll take that on board in terms of a training action. But there are, certainly concerns that this application is that incremental growth that, many people in the community won't necessarily favour. Thank you.
Thanks. Jeremy was next.
Thank you very much, Chair. I feel a bit on Groundhog Day here from the original application. I'll just make my points clear again, as Josh has done, on our support for the original application and why we believe it's necessary. As the officers have made clear in the report, there is a shortfall of 70% of purpose-built student accommodation across the city, and a preference for the use of purpose-built student accommodation across the city. This location being effectively 20 metres away from the university is always going to have, if you have a street 20 metres away from a university, and you're probably going to have quite a high proportion of students living in that location, purely because it's quite close to their main amenity. And also, as has been intimated by Katie Saunders, is that when you build purpose-built student accommodation, then you free up housing stock for other purposes, such as local residents. So, the number of students living in this area will not change one jot due to the building of this accommodation. What we're effectively doing, because students will always live next to the universities they want to study in. And we've got the University of Plymouth, and we've got the Arts University close by as well. They're not going to suddenly move to Southway or the north of the city because accommodation is built over there. So you're always going to have a high concentration of students living next to the universities, and that's not going to change. What's going to happen here is by building purpose-built student accommodation on North Hill, 20 metres away from the university, what we would hope and what we'd expect, since if student numbers not currently falling, but I would say more static in the city, is that what you're doing is you're providing more accommodation net, and therefore providing more accommodation to residents of the city, because effectively you're providing purpose-built accommodation for students, which frees up accommodation a bit further away from the university, but still probably within the boundaries of the ward, available for general members of the public. So this is a net benefit, and within Dev 12 planning considerations for the city. And as we've stated many times in this planning committee, there is a massive and aching need for housing in this city. and to basically oppose building or development because it happens to be focused on a particular community, even when the knock-on effects of that development will benefit the wider community, just seems absurd, given that we have this huge need for housing, people on housing lists, waiting lists, looking for accommodation right across the city. To turn down an application just seems absurd. And that's why I'd be supporting this application for the same reasons that I supported the original application. And just to cover the other aspects of sort of an incremental development, I don't understand I don't think it's sinister. There are any sinister developments here about trying to make a development incrementally, because if you're seeking capital for developments, then many developments happen on an incremental basis. As you complete one phase of a plan, you move to the second phase, and depending on the success of initial phases will basically enable subsequent phases. And as I've stated, there is an urgent need for accommodation. There's an urgent need for general accommodation. There's an urgent need for housing. There's an urgent need for student-based accommodation. And I don't foresee any particular issues with further development of this site, because they all benefit the community. They benefit the student community, which benefits the residential community, which benefits us all. So I don't have any objections to any aspects of this planning application, and I don't completely understand why the officers have recommended conditional approval for this, and understand why only Councillor Ricketts, who has a long-standing objection to any development in the ward, would object to it, and only he objected, and only one other member of the public has seen fit to object to this application. I can understand why. So I shall be supporting this planning application.
Jeremy, thank you. Tina?
Thank you, Chair. I come in because I missed the previous meetings when this was discussed, as I had a year off as Lord Mayor, so I can just deal with what is in front of me. Councillor Gosling has said a lot of what I feel, and I actually think this is a good idea, that this area, yes, it's got a long history, but it's also very much alive. It's mixed. The university is on the doorstep, and some students will obviously want to be close to the university, and they like smaller groups, in my experience. They don't necessarily want tower blocks, but in small groups near the university, on a main road. It's not as though they're tucked away down side streets and upsetting the neighbours at night or anything like this. I think this is an ideal place for them. And also, I think it's much preferable, because in my period as being a very mature student at the University of Exeter, I did wander around the country a lot doing research in various museums, and in places like Oxford and Cambridge and such, you would find ghost towns of empty streets with absolutely nothing in it. Private people couldn't live there. They were just left empty. I found those very depressing, and thank goodness we don't have them in Plymouth. And places like this will free up houses for people, or non-student families. I'm happy to support this.
Thanks, Tina. Any more? Josh again, and then I'm sensing we'll probably be ready. But Josh,
just
certainly.
playing devil's advocate. I mean, am I missing something here? Is this space above the existing commercial prime for further commercial development? Are there accountancy firms knocking on the door to build tower blocks there, or am I missing that this is a prime spot to be placing families above a commercial unit? Have I missed something there?
I think it's just students rather than.
That's what I say. I'm playing devil's advocate. Are we overlooking? Could there be families living there? Should there be families living there? Because I don't feel that there necessarily should be above that space. And what we've heard around makes a lot of sense. But there seems to be this undertone around the table that possibly we're overlooking something. And I just wanted to clarify. Do officers feel that this is you know, an opportunity to build residential housing in the space if this wasn't to go forward?
I don't see any issues with it being student accommodation. It complies with policy, so I haven't considered it on the basis of family housing.
Yeah, that's really reassuring because, you know, I feel the objection is a NIMBY objection, but I just wanted to make sure I had all the evidence in front of me before I said that. Thank you.
I mean, that's a very fair question, and my mind goes back to the previous application, the 2 units next door, which certainly the previous existing ground floor was used as a club or entertainment venue previously, and the issue was that it had lain empty and unused since I think before COVID, if I've got that right. And one of the considerations last time was that there was that the market had been tested, and there was no impetus from any developer or landlord or club operator or whatever to use it. And had there been, maybe our consideration may have been a little bit different, but the alternative was what we agreed on the ground floor next door versus an empty building going forward. That's what happened when we tested, or when officers tested the applicant, whoever it was, tested the market. So it's always worth looking at possible alternatives and why, in going back to your question, why they're not part of the mix. And I think we've heard that fairly, I think. I saw Patrick again, did I? And then go to Angela.
It was only briefly, Chair, and it's more for the benefit of the committee. We've always had, up until the new government decided to change the housing numbers, is a plan-led system. So you agree a plan, and the plan would take into account more significant development in communities throughout Plymouth, and this would be replicated throughout the country. So we've had a situation where last year 16-bed accommodation was approved. We're now in a situation, another 6. It could be we have another 12 or 16, and that would warrant what would relatively be a major application in a ward, which should be part of a plan. And it'll all be sort of plan-led, so you develop in accordance with the plan. The situation we're in now, as a result of the changes in the housing requirements that the government have set, is that we're reactive to proposals. We're not planning because we're not in a position to plan because we've got a deficit of accommodation as identified by the government. So that's the difference in approach really since last December, where communities knew what would be anticipated over the next 10, 15 years. Now we can't say that because developers quite rightly can make applications and they have to be dealt with not necessarily in accordance with the plan because the plan isn't supportable in its entirety, but you deal with the application before us. And that's the main point really. I think the landscape's changed, and it would be good to get the council back to a situation where we're in the forefront of a plan that the wider community supports. And this site may very well have been in an amended plan moving forward for student accommodation. It's just that the plan that was agreed in 2017-2018, this site wasn't identified, and that's the difference. Thanks, Chair.
Well, student accommodation is nothing new, as we've heard in this part of the city, and it could have been that interested parties made submissions to future-proof this if they don't like student accommodation here, and if people didn't bother at the plan-making stage, as I often tell people up and down the country when I speak to other councillors, often leaving it to a committee is too late. If you don't want, and this is current advice as well, if you don't want something built in your ward, then make sure the plan protects it. It doesn't give you 100% assurance, but it would mean an officer coming along and saying, we're not going to put this block of flats on this field because the plan prevents it. It's designated as green space or whatever it might be. Leaving it to the planning committee stage when there's nothing in our armoury to stop it if we wanted to prevent it really is missing the boat. I'll bring in Angela, and then I think we are probably ready to move on. Angela, over to you.
Very, very briefly, just following on from Josh, I just feel I'm in support of what Councillor Toohey and Councillor Gosling said, because this isn't a residential area. These are small rooms, there's no parking provision, there never will be you know, suitable for students with bikes and not families, which of course we do want to find other places for. But I think it really fits in with the university idea of an area where students can access their work easily.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been a healthy debate, I think. I'm all for mixed use when appropriate, but you will recall, colleagues, that we had the chance to do that further down the map on page 6 at the junction of Marlborough Road and North Hill, when we had an application to turn a redundant commercial property back into family dwelling, not student dwelling, family dwelling, and it was opposed by one of the local councillors. So I think we just need to retain a sense of proportion here, that we are next to, as Jeremy reminded us, 2 major centres of learning in the city. And guess what? It attracts accommodation for students. Who'd have thought? This is the right place to centre high quality student accommodation, not HMOs. And as we've heard, this will ease the pressure on other dwellings to remain or even convert into HMOs. So if nothing else, it's useful on that score alone. I think that it's fair of Councillor Ricketts to say it's a bit of an eyesore at the moment, but that's because next door hasn't been built yet. It's covered in scaffolding and hoardings and looks like a building site. So I wasn't when I visited it yesterday with officer and councillor colleagues, what's there at the moment isn't going to look like Blenheim Palace at the moment because it's a building site. When it's finished, I've got nothing to suggest it won't look good and decent, as the original application last year hinted, and I'm confident I can say the same thing about where we are. If we do get further applications to go over, is it doorsteps, is it called? Then we'll have to judge them as and when they come in, and they may be suitable, they may be unsuitable, who knows? That's a decision for the committee later on down the track, if indeed we ever get there. So we can only judge what we've got at the moment. I like the symmetry with the other 2 units that are currently being constructed. It makes sense to have students here. It makes sense to take pressure off other dwellings that might stay or be converted back into family dwellings. So I think it's a win-win for students and for the council and the wider community here. So I'm very, very content to support the recommendation, which is to grant conditionally, as outlined on page 5. So if we can move to the vote, please, I'd be grateful. At the risk of antagonising anyone looking at the clock, I will declare that one agreed. So thank you very much indeed for that. And we will move on to item 6.2, which is at page 21, and we're at 6 Tor Crescent. Now, Katie, I think I'm right in saying this is here purely on the basis of the employee status of the applicant. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct, Chair.
Okay. Our normal practice would be to move straight to the vote, but I do ask if there's any questions. If people do want to have questions, then we will have the presentation if there are any issues or difficulties. And I'm seeing some shaking of heads.
Chair, I'm happy to second that proposal to move on.
Okay. Unless I hear to the contrary, which I don't seem to, we'll do just that. So the recommendation on page 21 is to grant conditionally. If we could move to the vote, please. Unless there's any late changes of mind, I will agree that one carried as well. So thank you very much. Item number 7 is the list of planning application decisions. Is there anything anyone needs to raise or ask questions about or query there? No? Okay, we will note those. The appeal decisions come next, page 41 and 42. Katie, is there anything of interest that you need to bring to our attention there?
No, Chair.
That's the one. Okay. Anything from the committee? Patrick, yeah.
So I just wanted to note, obviously this is a tree preservation order where obviously the applicant went to appeal on our refusal and the inspector agreed with our views. So just shows the importance of tree preservation orders. So well done to the officers.
I haven't heard that phrase TPO for an awful long time. We will note that. And we have no exempt business, so thank you very much indeed, everybody, and see you all next time. Take good care.